Louis, good afternoon. How are you doing today?
Hi, Simon. Really good, thanks. And thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, no problem at all. No, I appreciate you taking time out your schedule to kind of do the recording and share some of this great insight and content that we're going to cover this afternoon. So yeah, really appreciate that. Um, okay, well look, I mean today's episode is called "Building High Performing and World Class Revenue Teams." So kind of says what it is on the tin type thing, but really excited to bring you onto the show and share a little bit about both your kind of personal story and also your viewpoint on how across your career you've built these sort of brilliant teams and obviously brought world class talent into the organisations that you represented.
Yeah.
So no, really excited about it. So thanks again. So look, so the series of podcasts over here from Thornton Gregory is pod leaders. So last summer I thought about some of the people and the brilliant minds that I've kind of met over the 10 years that I've spent in the software space. And I just kind of thought it was a bit of a shame that I've had these great conversations and forged these great relationships, but not really sharing with everybody and anybody that wants to listen. And so I just, I thought it'd be a great idea to kind of launch this and bring some of those stories to life, create a little bit of a platform as a business that, can share some of these insights to people that may be starting their career, maybe midway through, or even, people that are experienced heads that can learn a little bit from each other and create that little sense of community. So, we've published these across different, podcast channels as you'd expect, but what I look to do is look to kind of pull upon different lines of topics. So, today's all about obviously leadership and talking about building teams. But if you look at the other episodes, I've spoken to subject matter experts within RevOps, which I think is a awesome and kind of dynamic topic in our space. Sales enablement. Customer success and professional services, and did some stuff around actually like more regional stuff. Like I know we're going to touch upon it today, but I spoke to a guy that has just spent his whole career building teams and launching American businesses into the German speaking market. So I've certainly seen in my career that is a challenging thing to do well. But with Louis on today, I kind of sought him out. We fairly recently met, but I saw when we spoke to each other, just kind of had this like real depth of ability to sort of steer the ship, for both big and small organizations. And, if we talk about big tech, I mean, they don't get much bigger than working for SAP, SAS, HP, right, among others. So, big tech and the sort of, corporate world and, being successful in that environment and then making the transition into my world and our world now, but the startup and scale up space with certainly Uber. I mean, I was worried, Basware, would you describe that as a scale up, or they're pretty big nowadays? What do you think there, Louis?
Yeah, I mean, so most recently they're doing around about 200 million ARR. But when I was there, it was around about 120 million. So it's, we were scaling at the time. So yeah, it is one of those things that, again, part of that was a transition from going into what had been quite legacy on-prem into the cloud. So I've been through that transition a few times now. And, so there's a lot of learnings along the way. But yeah, I would have described them as a scale up.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how to describe them. I didn't want to do them a disservice, but big business, right? 200 million. But, so if I look at some of the episodes that, if I look at the theme that we're going for, I mean, most recently we had Ian Mason, there's Michael Shermack, we had Jamie Cloherty that we're going to get on as well. So all have like interesting viewpoints on the topic. So just check them out if you get a little bit of spare time. So look, I mean, that's a little bit of an intro to why and why we're here today and a little bit about the series. But Lou, just for the people that don't know your name yet or know you as a person, can you just share a little bit about your career today, please?
Yeah, no. So like I say, delighted to be here today, and thanks again for having me on. So I've been leading sort of revenue organizations in SaaS businesses now for well over a decade. However, I actually started my professional career off in banking back in the 1980s, actually. That's quite a long while ago, but with NatWest. And I joined them just after I finished my A-levels. Now, clearly that was a very different world back then. And I was on what was then a banking apprenticeship. During that time, I mean, we obviously learned about finance, but we also learned about accounting, operations, marketing, and sales as part of it. And what I really gravitated towards at that time was the marketing and sales part of it. And I guess that's been the foundation for everything else I've done in my career. So if you then sort of fast forward to the early 2000s, I was then working in a marketing agency as an account director. And it was that was the real catalyst for me moving into tech, because we got bought by a company called Axiom. Now, Axiom is a tech / marketing services provider. And what I learned there was I learned all about, how you sell and how you take things like what I'd learned in my marketing background into sales and ultimately, I guess, revenue leadership. I mean, since then, like you said earlier, I've been fortunate enough to work for some of the world's biggest tech companies. So SAP, SAS, HPE, and then as well, some of the scale ups that we've just talked about over the last decade. And that was as well as Basware and Uber, or companies like HRS, where I've led revenue teams and entire geographic territories. So that's been really, really interesting, doing both the revenue side and the GM side, and then also having accountability on a P&L perspective.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. I speak to some people that I really feel like that marketing, actually sitting almost client side, and that marketing experience, it's funny actually how, it's not a coincidence that, that they sometimes start on that path. Some of the learnings and kind of the credibility that brings into a role, certainly early in your career, I think, is something to maybe point out. But I get, in terms of key milestones, everybody, no career is linear, but, some people look back on certain points as defining moments. Maybe that's a bit kind of extreme, but, like maybe important moments. Have you got any of those? And if so, like, what are they and why?
Yeah, so I think there's a few, actually. The first one, and probably the most impactful one, was in 1994. And that was when I was still with NatWest. And the bank was going through a massive transformation just post ERM. That was the European exchange rate mechanism. Disaster that there was at the time. And, if we think that interest rates right now, they've been historically high. Actually, that was nothing compared to what it was then. I mean, this is when interest rates were over 15%, and that was properly painful. I mean, people were literally posting their house keys back through letterboxes and walking away from the properties. That's how bad it got.
Really? Oh my God.
Yeah, no, it was terrible. And as a consequence of which, the bank sort of offered, everybody at the time voluntary redundancy packages, and I took one, which was great. And that actually acted as a catalyst for me then to leave the UK, and I went over to the Alps and to go and do a casual ski season, and that was what it was supposed to be about. Yeah. Anyway, I ended up in the Alps for almost 7 years, not just 6 months. And during that time, I worked for a number of different ski tour operators before I set up my own company in 1998. Now, that was another key milestone because I was 28 years old at the time, and that company lasted not quite 12 months as I went bust.
Oh no!
But it's definitely been that impact. The impact of that was super impactful because I've never learned as much as I did when I lost that company, and I've kept a lot of those lessons with me ever since, and I still apply them every day to everything that I do. And then, like I alluded to earlier on, the other significant leap was then making the transition from marketing in an agency to then selling into marketers at Axiom. And I love being able to use all the experiences I had as a marketer and translate that into sales context. And it's given me a really great appreciation of how to make marketing and sales alignment work more effectively. And in the leadership roles that I've had, it's just allowed me to drive better results than I think I would otherwise have been able to do.
Yeah. I'm sure there's lots of great stories from the Alps that we could maybe talk about another day over a beer. No, it sounds like great fun. Yeah, that sounds like great fun. So, look, I mean, in terms of the scale of some of those businesses, Axiom I know is very big as well, but SAP, SAS, and HPE we talked about, yeah. And then moving into the scale-up startup space. Some people some people struggle, candidly, don't they? Like
Yeah.
making that transition. Yeah. How did you find that transition, and what are the kind of, can you share a little bit of some of the learnings?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the thing that's always been consistent is that regardless of the scale of the organization or the product or the services that you're producing and selling, or even the sectors and segments that you're serving, it's always going to be down to people, right? We're in people business, and that's important. People ultimately buy from people. They buy from people that they trust, and they buy from people that they like. Now, you may have watched or read or listened to some of the Simon Sinek stuff in the past.
Hmm.
And when he did his original tech talk back in 2009, he talked about the limbic brain making all the decisions. In short, what he was basically saying was that people make an emotional decision to either do or don't do something. And then what they do is they go and find the data to reinforce their beliefs that they've made a good decision, right? Well, I think that applies in any context. So as vendor landscapes have become more complicated, and let's face it, there are more vendors out there than ever before.
Yeah.
Whether that's, in the top segments where it's like large enterprise, you've got the SAPs and the Oracles of the world, or even, in some of the more diverse segments where you've got, small little startups and scale ups. There are more software vendors out there than ever before. And the thing that is constant is that buyers are still incredibly time poor. And there
Mm.
simply just aren't enough hours in the day for them to do their day jobs and then meet with every Tom, Dick, and Harriet wanting to sell whatever it is they're selling. So really, what I learned was, and this is what's consistent, it's only the sellers, the ones that really make buyers feel special in some way, that get cut through, that build that rapport, that build that trust, and that ultimately get access to those, ever elusive champions, decision makers, and economic buyers. Now, they're the ones that get to put their business cases across the executive team's collective desks and win deals. So that's always been consistent. Likewise, your most important assets within your organization are equally your people. And as leaders, I really do believe that regardless of the size of the organization or the segment that you're in, you still have to equip, train, and coach your teams and your colleagues to be the best versions of themselves. And you need to provide them with the right support infrastructure and allow them the right leeway to be able to do their jobs effectively. And I don't think that changes at all.
Mm. No, it's great. I mean, maybe I'm biased, but maybe that's lovely to hear that. Well, that's obviously reassuring to hear that people are the epicenter of all the good that's hopefully going to be going on. But in terms of the when you're looking for a role, if you're looking for a role, you've obviously joined some great organisations. Be cool to kind of just shed a little bit of light on why did you choose Basware? Why did you choose Uberall? Are there any particular reasons that stood out at that particular moment?
Absolutely. I mean, I think in each case, it's all about, well, for me anyway, taking on a new and exciting challenge and then having the opportunity to work with some amazing people. I think it's also about being given that ability to have a real impact within those organizations. And that's impact across the people and the processes and the technology. So if I break that down a bit, I mean, let's think of people first. One of the things that I love to do as a leader is develop people. And I've been incredibly lucky to have had a number of folks I've worked with who have taken me under their wings as my career was developing. So I kind of see it as almost my duty to pay that kindness forward with those that I've been fortunate enough to lead. Now, add to that in a very selfish way, I think I get as much pleasure and joy out of seeing those individual members of my team and the team as a whole and the company at large being successful. So when I get to train and coach others, it's a fundamental cornerstone of my philosophical approach to leadership.
Mm.
So I've always tried to take opportunities where I have the opportunity to do that, and that's what I kind of look for.
No, that's cool. That's cool, and that's great. Go on.
Yeah, I was going to say the second thing then is the effect on processes. If I look at my last 3 assignments, I've been able to work with teams to develop and implement sales processes, sales plays, the GTM strategy, and the operating model, which is, for me, in the last sort of instances, has included opening new markets, developing new sales hubs in places like Barcelona. And that's a huge amount of responsibility, but it's also a real privilege to be able to do that and support those teams. And then third, I think it's about having the opportunity to implement those operating models and the technologies to support those processes. So again, if I look back over the last sort of 10 years, there have been so many developments in sales tech, and around sales enablement, sales automation and engagement, conversation intelligence, so that sales professionals can spend less time on admin and more time with customers, and thereby add value to the sort of engagements that they're having. But being able to do that and take away that overhead from your teams, that again is something. And so where I've had the opportunity to do those sort of three things, that's what I've really looked about.
Yeah, cool. And were those three key criteria when you were looking? They're obviously very hard to find, but did it take you a while to find each of those particular opportunities, or was it just serendipitous that they just fell in the place at the right time?
With Basware, I think it was sort of serendipitous that it sort of just turned up at the right time. With HRS, that was more of that's one of the reasons they sought me out to do
cool.
that. And then again with Uberall, I think it was, we were going through quite a big transition in terms of scale up. And again, it was a real privilege to be able to do that and have a real impact on putting in those technologies, putting in place the sales plays, putting in place sales methodologies, that kind of stuff. So it's been really, really good to be able to do that.
Yeah, cool. If we go back to point one that you raised there, just about paying it forward and mentorship and management and just how you're kind of giving back, I guess, a little bit.
Yeah.
If you can, maybe you could mention a few of those influential people, mentors or managers that played a big part in your career development, and who were they and why?
Yeah, sure. So I think I've been really fortunate in this space because I've had a real balanced mix between some amazing mentors and managers that I've had the privilege of working with, but ironically also some not so great ones. What I found out was that if you choose to, you can learn as much from the ones that weren't so great as the good ones. But let's stick to the good ones to start off with. I mean, one that really stands out was quite early on in my career, and that was at Axiom. There was a guy called Raphael Rowe, and he was an absolute legend. And what Raphael taught me was how to say no and qualify out of deals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an art that oftentimes people don't know quite how to do. Nobody wants to give up a deal, but actually, as I think now, Andy White has sort of adopted with his mentor stuff. He says nobody ever regrets qualifying out of a deal.
Yeah, I was going to mention
something that Raphael was saying 20 years ago. So cool. it was great. The next one was a guy called Mark Kenyon. Mark, he's retired now, but I met him at SAP, and then he brought me along to SAS, and he taught me how to be truly humble. And there's a lot of value in learning humility. I really think there is. Mm-hmm. And then at HPE, I was very lucky. I had two fantastic leaders there. One was a guy called Martin Hess, and the other one was a guy called Dominic Akari. And interestingly, what they taught me, because I was how to be more human. So I really started dialing up the EQ side of things with those guys. And I've been really lucky that I've also had some great mentors along the way. People like John Wright, Carl Rigby, Sue Warman, and Shireen Mahag. Now, these are people that have all believed in and supported me along the way. And I think you always need someone in your corner cheering you on. The last thing I would say on this is, I think what often gets overlooked is having great colleagues and teammates around you. People that you can collaborate with and bounce ideas off, or simply talk to when you don't know the answers. The best bit of advice I can give to anyone I know is build a strong network around with you. I mean, it'll always stand you in good stead, and that's really super important.
No, it's cool. Okay, well, look, I mean, we'll dive into sort of more of the kind of the high performing and world-class revenue teams questions now, but thank you for the insight into your career and stuff. Really, really interesting stuff. Look, as an experienced profile as you are, doing this a few times in the past, if you were to kind of describe the EMEA market opportunity to a foreign US or APAC headquartered business,
Yeah.
how would you describe that in your own words?
Right. So that's a great question. I think first off, it's complicated. And by that, I mean EMEA is complicated. I think the easiest way to start off is maybe by starting off by saying what it's not.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest lesson there is it's not one homogenous market. There are a myriad different legislative frameworks, customs, cultures, ways of working and interacting, ways of doing business. And you need to take account of all of that. The second thing I'd say is it's a lot more expensive than you think it's going to be. You need to be prepared to make a long-term substantial investment to get it right. And it's going to take time and effort. Now, just talking about different geographies, I think what I found is that oftentimes, and this is particularly the case with a lot of US-based SaaS businesses, and I think it's probably something that's a bit of a legacy from the late 90s and early 2000s, is that feeling that you can stand up a small team in London and from there you can conquer Europe.
Yeah.
And that may have been true then, but it's not anymore. I mean, things have changed so dramatically over the last several years, post-Brexit and COVID. And now with cheap money having dried up, there's understandably a much greater emphasis on doing sustainable, predictable, profitable revenue growth. And that's going to be hard for some folks to achieve, especially in overcrowded markets. We have literally hundreds of players serving a particular market, and the unit economics for each of them isn't quite stacking up. So let me give you an example. I've been around MarTech now for over 2 decades. And there's a particular guy who does the chief MarTech marketing technology landscape chart every year, a guy called Scott Brinker. Now, when he first did this in August 2011, there were maybe, I don't know, 150 different marketing technologies that were on that thing. And I think, you know, as Scott himself will say, it wasn't complete, and he certainly missed out quite a lot. But if you now fast forward to the latest one that he's done, and he now does this full time for 2024, which is a very complete list. He has a super graphic, and that now has over 14,100 different technologies just in the MarTech space.
Yeah.
And that represents a 28% year-on-year growth just in the top technologies that are available to marketers. I'll give you a clue, the market has not grown by a quarter in the last 12 months. I mean, if anything, spend on marketing technologies has contracted across the board.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about that, that means that it's going to be much more difficult to penetrate. So you have to really make sure that you've invested in things like, you know, what does your technology stack look like to compete against that? Have you worked out, you know, your ICP? Do you really understand who you're selling into? Where are your best market opportunities going to be? And you also have to think that, again, as the landscape has changed, and I think politically as well, things have become a little bit more, how shall I say this, inward looking. So people want to buy from companies that operate in their markets and their home markets. I saw this quite a bit actually at Uberall. So when we sold in DACH, which was metaphorically our backyard, we'd win 9 times out of 10, right? Now in France, we had a competitor, Partout, and it was the darling of the masses there. And similarly in the Nordics, it was a company called PinMeTo. Now, even though putting my Uberall hat on, I would sit there and say in both cases the product offering wasn't necessarily as advanced or as complete, they would still win because they were local. Yeah, meanwhile in the UK, the biggest competitor we always saw was a US competitor, which was Yext. So what I'm basically saying is you really have to think about which markets you're entering into and how you're going to approach it. And so the first piece of advice I would give to anybody entering into these markets is do your homework. You really need to research the market opportunity in the offering. And you really need to reevaluate what your product market fit is for those territories that you want to enter into before you start hiring. As I sort of already alluded to, you really also need to nail your ICP for those territories. And it will change a little bit by territory, but it goes beyond simple firmographic definitions. So like I say, work with your existing product marketing folks, really understand the challenges, build out the proposition, and the way you're going to position it with relevant use cases for those potential customer bases in those markets. You got to think about what pains are you solving and who cares about that, and what are you going to pay for it. Then you've got to also identify your target accounts and hire folks that already know the space and have relationships in those accounts, or work with partners that do, so that you can get some sort of marquee brands on board in those territories. So I think that's what you kind of need to do, because ultimately you're going to want those marquee accounts to be your brand ambassadors. So invest heavily to ensure that they have fantastic onboarding experiences and they work well with your teams, and that you can really drive value back to their businesses, because that's why they would have chosen you, and that's the message you need to get into market. Lastly, I think it's about how you tie that all together, about how do you make sure your go-to-market approaches and sales motions are fit for purpose. It's amazing to me how many times I've seen companies talk about and implement an enterprise sales motion when their ICP is more SMB, and their average order values are around 20k. I mean, if you start building out an enterprise sales motion for that kind of thing, your unit economics don't stack up and it doesn't work. So really think about these things.
Yeah, that's also very complete and great answer. I mean, there's probably subsets of that answer that you could almost spend a whole episode on to but no, it's hugely common. I mean, I remember, if I just link it back to kind of recruitment, but if I remember when I first started out, and there was, companies that would, as you say, land somebody in London, please. First year we expect $1 million. Year two will be 1.5, and then we'll maybe start to bring in a team. It's just not feasible. I mean, it's not just last year, in the last 5, 6, 7 years, as competition has kind of increased, as you say, like buyer's paralysis, you just can't even get a seat at the table. There's too much local expertise, credibility that you need to cut through to even get into the RFP at times. So, and companies, experienced leaders like yourself, obviously, maybe have learned sometimes the hard way, but
very hard way. I've got the battle scar to prove it.
Yeah, exactly that. But sometimes it does need a bit of, so it takes a lot of planning, I can imagine, and a lot of back and forth before even, maybe the first investment is made. But that's what makes it exciting, doesn't it? Because it's a huge opportunity if you get right, Maybe that segues nicely into the next question, but it's like, what I find is half this battle is like regional or EMEA VP is about setting the right expectations to maybe the US counterparts or APAC counterparts, whether that be board or C-suite or senior leadership. Have you got a bit of a kind of ethos and viewpoint on how you do that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is however long you think it's going to take to achieve those goals, double that time. No, seriously.
Okay.
I mean, you really need to think about the timeline. I mean, there's an old adage, isn't there? There's nothing worse than over-promising and under-delivering. And that's not to say that you need to be overly pessimistic about your assumptions, but you need to know your data, ratify your plans, and be realistic. I mean, also, as I just alluded to, you need to know your unit economics. And I think, I don't know if you've ever watched Chris Walker on LinkedIn. He posts a lot of stuff. He's great. But as he often reminds us, it's absolutely crucial to know your cost of acquisition. So CAC to LTV is clearly one of those core metrics that most financiers and boards are going to scrutinize. So you need to be laser focused on, making sure that those unit economics stack up and on what you're going to achieve. Because I think one of the things that, again, people talk about is focus. So I'm going to focus on A, I'm going to focus on B, I'm going to focus on C. Oh, and then there's D, E, and F, and then suddenly I've got a list as long as you're on. That's going to fail.
Okay.
You've got to really narrow it down. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier on about, set an expectation about ICPs. Set an expectation about the kind of accounts you're going to go to. Set an expectation about what you're not going to do. And this goes back to one of the lessons I learned, know how to say no. Because, you suddenly enter into too many market segments, you're spread too thin, you will fail, then whatever targets and quotas you're going to set, make sure they're achievable, because nothing is going to demotivate your team quicker than having unrealistic targets that they consistently fail to hit.
Yeah.
So that's a really important bit. So I think striking the right balance between creating ambitious goals while not stretching the organization to breaking point is going to be tricky. And I think the most important thing here is to take both a top-down and a bottom-up approach to agreeing those targets with the sales team, right? The people that you employ as those, and agreeing that with them, because they're going to need to believe that they can hit it while creating that right environment for you as a leader to be able to achieve predictable, sustainable, profitable revenue growth. And that it's tricky. I mean, you know, money's dried up. It's not about growth at any cost anymore. It's got to be planned.
So are you somebody that collaborates with the sellers about the target, or are you telling them this is what it is, knowing that it's on the edge of possible?
Yeah. So let me answer that question with a question.
Please.
If you are in a situation where somebody says to you something along the lines of, "What do you think is achievable?" Now, there are two things that are going on here psychologically, and this is where I think people sometimes get it wrong, because they go, "Oh, yes, everybody's going to lowball that, obviously, because they want to get paid." But actually, I think people, you know, with the right intent, they want to stretch themselves as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll probably go slightly lower than maybe where you want to go, but then they'll go higher than maybe your pessimistic view might be. But oftentimes people will surprise you. And I think this is where the role of leadership becomes really important. We talked about equip, train, and coach. And this is where coaching can become a real ally for you, because you can coach them to a slightly bigger number, but they then have ownership. The whole point of a lot of coaching is that the coachee takes ownership of the outcomes. If I impose something on you, you don't own it. I've put it on you. Whereas if you are the one that comes up with the numbers and you are the one that takes ownership of it, you're much more likely to put the effort in to make it happen. That's just psychology. You know, and it's been talked about left and right and centre. There's some great John Whitmore. So John Whitmore, he wrote a lot about this kind of stuff. And I think it's really, really important to sort of have that as an approach. So that's what I mean by top down. So you might say this is what we need to achieve, but then you're also looking at from a pipeline perspective. What do I need from each level that goes in to make it? But what you need to do is coach your teams to be able, so that they can work out what do they need, and what's the work effort that's going to be required, and what's a realistic target that they can achieve. Because again, creating the right atmosphere where everybody's like, you know, it's a stretch target, but I feel I can get it, and I own that. That's golden.
Yeah. And I think as well, coming in as a new sales leader, that exercise of empowering those people is going to be obviously a very positive thing for everybody involved. But I think it tells you a lot about said person, doesn't it? You know, just that very short conversation. I mean, everybody wants to hire A players, but if, you know, you get the sense that they're, you know, trying to undercut what is possible, you know, you want people that, as you say yourself, that are going to push themselves, not to the limit, because, you know, but, you know, be able to definitely, you know, get the company, strike that good balance. So that's you know, there's a lot of psychology in there. I like it.
Yeah.
On that, culture is obviously a very subjective point, and you know, it's brilliant to hear the different people's viewpoint on that. What do you see culture being, and how do you build it in your teams?
So that's a great question. So I think it's built around what I think of as core operating principles. Okay, and I use that term because I think it's slightly different than just values, which can oftentimes be a little bit formulaic. I mean, like, you know, how many times have you heard things like integrity or growth mindset or customer centricity? I'm not saying these are bad things, but in honesty, would you want to work for or do business with a company that wasn't those things by default? I mean, of course not, right? They're kind of table stakes. Instead, I think of guiding principles, a set of simple instructions, if you like, that act as an operating template for people within the organization. So for me, it's things like, being all in, collaborating across the organization, inventing the future, being open and real, investing wisely, having fun. I mean, nobody wants to do all these things and not enjoy the working environment they're in. Then I think the other thing, if you want to embed that culture, you have to demonstrate those behaviors yourself. It's no good saying one thing over here and then modeling entirely different behaviors over here. So it's about how you behave, but then it's also about how you communicate. That communicate needs to be consistent, and communicate. And once you think you're done communicating, communicate again, because that's where I think a lot of organizations get it wrong. They'll say something once and think it's one and done. It's not. It's about that continual reinforcement, so that everybody, there's a reason we say singing from the same hymn sheet, is because we want people reacting and acting in a way that meets our core operating principles. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And it's funny, actually, from speaking to your peers, there is a theme here where everybody talks about there's no such thing as over communicating. So that's, I totally agree. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I mean, if we've learned anything through COVID in this kind of remote or non-remote setting, everybody does need a bit of course correction, and sometimes needs to take the head up out the Zoom or computer screen and just understand where everybody's heading at times. So no, I agree. The again, quite a sprawling question, but I'll ask it anyway. If you were to kind of do this again with everything that you've learned, with a blank sheet of paper, and I don't like the term unlimited resources, but let's just go with it for now, yeah, because that isn't a real thing. But how would you actually go about constructing your go-to-market team and allocate your resource to take on EMEA?
That's an interesting one. I think first it goes back to what you've learned, right? And what I've learned over the years is that building a go-to-market team is a team sport. Okay, so as a go-to-market leader, I think you're incredibly reliant on folks from all over the organization. So it's really important to build relationships with those folks across that whole piece. In terms of the team makeup itself, I think it's not just about hiring the right ICs, but it's about building the right support infrastructure around them. And I think this is, early on in my leadership career, this is probably where I got it wrong. I thought it was just about hiring A players. It's not. You have to be able to give them the infrastructure to make them great. And you have to sort of, goes back to what I was saying about entering markets. You've got to work out which markets you're going to serve, the customer challenges you're going to solve, and the sales motions that are going to resonate. And you've got to suss all this stuff out first. And I think people do it on the fly too often. And that's, again, something that I've learned. I think the other thing then is you've got to ensure that there's a consistently delivering demand generation engine, and that's up and running across the organization. So it's not marketing's challenge. It's not sales's challenge. It's not, everybody's responsible for, demand generation. Everybody's responsible for pipeline. If you don't have a pipeline of credible opportunities, the organization is going to wither and die. So you've got to work incredibly closely with marketing, with your partner ecosystem. Every rep needs to be prospecting and creating real opportunities that they believe they can win. I think the last part of the puzzle is having a really great relationship and partnership with your RevOps colleagues. I mean, you need to know, as a leader, you need to know what's happening in your business, what your real pipeline velocity and conversion rates look like, and understanding where your performance bottlenecks lie. I mean, if you don't know any of that, then it's going to be impossible to forecast. And as a revenue leader, you're only as good as your ability to forecast accurately. And that's what gives you credibility. That's what gives you license. That's what gives you leeway.
Cool. Yeah. Let's just go back one step into the demand generation piece.
Sure.
So you mentioned marketing, you mentioned partners, but you didn't mention anything about SDRs or BDRs. Are you somebody that still believes there's a place in the market for that, or are you somebody that actually thinks that, you know, like we're seeing on LinkedIn and companies are spinning these sort of AI SDRs companies, in fact. What's your viewpoint on that?
So I've gone around the houses on this, and it's a live sort of issue. If I think about where we were, say 10 years ago, it was SDR this, BDR that, blah blah blah, and building out huge teams. And this now goes back to unit economics. If I add people that are, say, doing outbound dials, and let's face it, the majority of BDRs don't even like picking up a phone anymore. They'll send
Yeah.
a million and one different emails. Well, I can automate that, but not only that, but if I'm going to automate all of that, I'm sending out a lot of emails that people aren't necessarily reading. People still, as I said earlier, want to buy from people. And
Yeah.
if you're going to pick up the phone, you want the people that actually understand the business challenges and can have a proper conversation doing that. So I believe, and increasingly my viewpoint has come to this, is that actually your individual contributors, your AEs, should be the ones doing their own outbound demand generation. So that's the BDR side of it, the business development side of it. On the SDR side, so, and by that I mean very much inbound, you have to have that partnership between inbound SDRs and marketing, so they've got something that's constantly coming in that they are then, having the conversations with, and they should be more geared towards, I think, almost like a sort of sales academy kind of thing. You want people, again, I'm not even sure that SDR is necessarily the right thing. It's almost like an apprenticeship for an inside sales rep, because that's the way you want people to sort of grow, and they need to start understanding, how do I start qualifying things? Because oftentimes, and I've seen this again 5-10 years ago, we had a lot of SDRs, BDRs just making appointments, booking time in the diary, and the quality of the leads was, well, I'm getting metrics on a number of meetings that I book, and that's how I get paid. Doesn't say anything about the quality of them.
Yeah.
So I've actually, in recent years, my thinking has moved quite substantially. I'm away from the idea of business development reps. I think AE should be doing more and more of this. I'm all in favour of sales development reps for the inbound piece and doing some early qualification and maybe doing some early demos so that people can do that. It's not about necessarily qualifying something to death, because somebody picks up the phone, they want to see what it's like. Actually, it's part of what you're doing from a brand perspective as much as anything else. This is how we work. This is what we do. This is what our platform looks like. If you don't want to know anything else, that's fine. But at least you've then translated through your message and your value proposition in a way that will resonate. And when people do get rounds to being in a sales cycle, they'll remember you.
Yeah. Again, it's a complex, changing discussion, isn't it? That one. I like the idea of this sales academy. So you're saying, like, the inbound then gets promoted into the outbound, and maybe the outbound in time has a chance to maybe move into maybe even the quota carrying sales.
Yeah, well, I would actually say that it's not even inbound to outbound. It's inbound to inside sales. You actually get some of the small deals. If you serve an SMB segment, if you've got a transaction size that's maybe 10 grand in some of those things, why would you not let somebody junior take those opportunities and you train and coach them through? I mean, I remember in yesteryear, you had these big sort of sales universities that IBM ran, Xerox ran, Oracle, SAP, or HPE. We all ran that for kids coming out of university. You take them on board and you put them through almost like a sales apprenticeship. Where's that now? And if we as organizations don't invest in this now, we're going to end up with some very mediocre salespeople going down the line.
Yeah. Right. So what do you think are the biggest challenges in EMEA for building a customer base? I mean, you talked a little bit about the opportunity, but what are a couple of the challenges?
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily just pertinent to EMEA. I think this is in general. But I think the biggest thing, and the biggest thing that's going to have an impact, is sorting out sales productivity. It's something that every revenue leader, if they're not talking about it right now, they should be. but pretty much everybody that I know is talking about it. And that productivity comes back to unit economics. I mean, I think what you need to do, first of all, is you need to have a consistent approach to rolling out sales plays and sales methodologies. But you simultaneously, and this is maybe the bit that's pertinent to EMEA, how to take account of the nuances in each of those markets, how people do business, the local customers that we already spoke about, and the competitive landscape. Now, that last bit about the competitive landscape and how that works in each country, that bit includes your physical presence in those countries. And I think that's one of the things that people need to really think about, depending on the market they're entering into. If I think about it, and it does vary by proposition and average transactional values, but let me give you an example. If I'm selling into, let's say, a large French retailer, and they've got their head office function in, I don't know, Toulouse or something like that. If I have a platform that's only available in English with support based out of Atlanta, that's just not going to fly, regardless of how brilliant your product may be. So you have to have resources available to service the customers who speak the local language and understand the context of what's going on in that market if you really want to provide a first-rate service. And it's not just about winning that initial deal, it's about maintaining a productive and healthy relationship, which allows you and your customer to both thrive and then upsell, cross-sell, hit your NRR targets, all these other kind of things. The other thing then, I think, and this is where it is a bit more nuanced, is finding the right talent. I mean, that's always been the case, Talent acquisition, I think, is a fundamental challenge for any business. So finding the folks with the right experiences, the right skills, the values, the principles, the mindsets, whatever is crucial. I'm always reminded at this point of things like what Jim Collins said in Good to Great. First who, then what? You get the right people on the bus and get them sitting in the right seats, and that's what works out.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Okay. So look, I think we've covered, just in terms of there was a question around foundation and core things, but I think, look, we'll jump on to the AI question that I had. So
Sure.
You touched a little bit about SDRs and automation, in the question before last, but how do you see sort of AI affecting go-to-market efforts? And are you seeing any really cool kind of use cases that you want to share without giving away any secret sauce or top secret stuff, but anything that you're seeing amongst you or your peers?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think AI is going to be a massive game changer. Or it's not going to be, it already is.
Yeah.
Right. And everybody's jumped on the bandwagon of generative AI, but the reality is that we've had AI around for a decade. Whether people have chosen to employ it or not, that's a different conversation. But I mean, if I think about it, who wouldn't want an AI platform take a whole bunch of menial research, admin, coaching and engagement overhead straight out? Because that's effectively what it can do. I mean, and as I think I've already said, I mean, pretty much every single player in the sales tech space, whether that's sales enablement, sales engagement, revenue intelligence, conversational intelligence, all those kind of guys, they're all leveraging AI across their platforms to make both individual contributors and revenue leaders' jobs easier. Let me give you an example. I think that's probably the easiest way of doing it. And it's almost like a day in the life. And this is what I would be doing, and how I would be using AI in any organization I was in. So let's say I'm an individual contributor. So I start my day with a list of tasks that's been created for me that I need to achieve, and they're served up to me via my sales engagement platform, right? Now, I can be served via the sales engagement platform interfacing with the CRM system. It's prioritized, and many of the actions that I need to take have got suggested ways of executing them. Whether that's maybe, I don't know, it's generated an email for me, or it's suggesting a piece of collateral that I need to use next. And it's determining what's likely to be the best next action in my pursuit. So that bit's done for me. Why would I not want AI doing that for me? Next thing, I've got to prepare for a customer meeting. So I can automate the research to look up my stakeholder map, and that can be in my CRM. I can go out and ask the AI to find out who the people are. I can have my call plan pre-prepared, depending on where I'm up to in my pursuit, with an outline. I can quickly search for and automatically customize any presentation assets via a sales enablement platform. I've got all those things available to me, and that just cuts down a massive overhead in terms of the time I spend doing stuff, so that I can actually spend more time in front of customers. Now, I'm having that meeting, and let's say during that meeting, the conversational intelligence platform is recording the entire call. And this serves maybe 5 purposes. So firstly, I can focus on listening to what the customer is saying in the moment and respond contextually without being distracted by the need to take copious amounts of notes, right? Second, I can use that same recording to automatically generate a summary of the meeting with action points for all parties. And then I can share that recording via a digital deal room. That's happening more and more and more. Third, as people in the customer organization access those assets in the deal room, I can track who's accessing what they're particularly interested in, and get some insights that will help me understand what my next best action is likely to be. Fourth, my manager can use the metadata from the recording as a basis for benchmarking me against my teammates, and also using it as the basis for coaching. And fifth, I can make an objective determination based on, the sentiment from the call, together with an understanding of the topics covered in that call, and then other interactions that maybe not only I'm having, but other people in my sales team are having, and within my organization, about where the deal actually stands, so I can have a much more improved understanding of where I'm up to in the deal. Which brings me on to sort of like the next point, because now as a sales manager, I can then roll all that data up to give me the guts of my forecast that I then need to submit to my line manager, and then she in turn could look at it and have a confidence judgment that the system is making on my forecast based on how I forecasted it in the past and how accurate that's been, together with my win rates or my team's win rates, average deal cycles, and benchmark that against everybody else. Meanwhile, by having all of this happening in the background without me having to really do anything, I've got more time to do more prospecting, have more customer meetings, maybe even attend a conference without actually adversely impacting my time with my customers or prospects. So I don't know what's not to like about that.
Yeah, I was just thinking in my head there as you were running through that. If my dad, who's now retired but been in sales all his life, heard that, he almost wouldn't believe you. Just like the application of AI in the real world nowadays is just, it's just driving so much efficiency,
Yeah.
isn't it? I think that's what we're sort of summarizing here, which is going to
And,
just be put you in front of more customers more
yeah.
often.
And I think the other thing as well, from an overhead perspective, because what I've seen, particularly in the conversational intelligence, customer engagement, and sort of revenue intelligence space, and also sales enablement space, is a lot of these technologies are now sort of morphing together. And certainly the capabilities are being built out by everybody. So they've all got roughly the same capability. So rather than having to overlap with vendor A, vendor B, vendor C, and vendor D within my sales organization, I'm increasingly being able to go down one route or another.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. Look, we've got 6, 7, 8 minutes maybe left, and we've got 5 questions. So look, I know you're multilingual, I
Yeah.
believe. German, English, and
Just about get by in
Spanish.
Portuguese.
Portuguese. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, that's obviously a blessing on your side. But like, what's your opinion of having people in market on the ground, local language speaking, or can you sell to some of these markets effectively from the UK, let's say?
So yes, you can sell effectively from another country, but you do need the language skills.
Okay.
So, and I think it depends again on what it is you're selling and the complexity within that sale and the
Yeah.
number of stakeholders that are going to be involved. So again, let me try and explain it by way of an example. If I'm selling a proposition that has low complexity with a ticket value of say 5k and it's aimed at small businesses and a short sales cycle, then it's not only something that I can do remotely with an inside sales team with a predominantly inbound sales motion, but I actively want to encourage that to make the unit economics work. So yes, language skills are still important, but the location of those reps is less so. Now, if I
Mm.
contrast that with a sort of large enterprise proposition with a lot of complexity, a lot of effort required, both in terms of the technical and business implementation lift, and a ticket price in the millions and deal cycle that's over 12 months, then that's completely different. And
Yeah.
people are going to want to meet people, look them in the eyes, press the flesh, that kind of stuff, and be able to build trust. If you're going to ask me to make a bet with you that's say €5 million, then I want to know that you're going to be able to deliver. And the only way I want to do that is by meeting you face to face on my terms. So that's how I would contrast the difference.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Cool. So you touched a little bit about people and the importance of getting the right people on the bus, as you put it. I think that was a cool analogy, right? But talent war, like even in the current market, is fierce.
Yeah.
Are there any tips and tricks or ways you see this in terms of being able to effectively bring in A players to your teams?
Yeah, but I think we've already alluded to it a little bit in some of the other answers I've given, because I don't think it's just about finding A players, because you can stick an A player into an environment that doesn't have the right infrastructure behind it and they'll fail. It doesn't make any difference. So firstly, I think that it's not just about finding people who have more experience and more battle scars than anybody else, and they know the industry, they know the buyers and whatnot. I think the second half of that equation is how well your organisation is set up to, support those folks as they come on board. As I think I've already said, sales is a team sport. Now, my fear here is that there are a lot of people in the market, and this goes back to what we were saying about the training piece, they're just not investing anything like enough on training the teams. And that's especially true, I think, with regard to folks taking on newbie salespeople that come into their first ever sales role. There's generally some onboarding, but there's maybe not much in the way of reinforcement. And I think that's been compounded with the shift to remote work, which is fine in circumstances. But I think when you're bringing in newbies, you kind of need to have that hands-on piece with them so that they then work through the sales academy kind of thing. So I think that's quite an important thing. The second thing I think then is, like I said, the infrastructures, understanding what your ICP is, what the sales motion needs to be, having value propositions already defined, and then content for each step of the sales journey. So I think there's a lot of stuff there. So ultimately, I think what I'm saying is it's a lot easier to become an A player when you've got those things in place than when you haven't.
Yeah, and I think sat where I'm sat, if you have those things in place and you can clearly articulate that in an interview format, you're going to inherently bring in better people, because that's where they're drawn to. So I think that's a great point to make there. Okay, so look, in terms of key characteristics, like when you're interviewing these people, is there anything that you really look for when you're screening?
Absolutely. So I'd say it's 4 things: attitude, intent, passion, and possibly most importantly, curiosity. Those are the key fundamentals for me in any team. And it doesn't matter what role you've got in the revenue team, whether you're an SDR, an AE, a CSM, a sales manager, or even the CRO. You've got to turn up every day with the right attitude, a real fire in your belly about what you're going to do, and an ingrained curiosity that drives you to understand your customers' challenges and drives you to always be improving your knowledge and expertise.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah. Sales process. There's lots of them out there. There's the usual suspects. You talked a little bit about Andy White and stuff and Medic, but what's your viewpoint on that and how important that is in terms of driving, your sales culture?
I think it's absolutely critical, but it's not a one-time action. I think it's something that you constantly need to go back to and review to make sure that whatever your process is, it's still fit for purpose in the context of the market conditions that you're facing and where you are in terms of your evolution. And the way I would do that is take the learnings that you get from all the deals you have in every quarter and see what's positively and negatively impacting your conversion and win rates at every point in your sales cycle. So, all the way through the funnel. And then roll those insights up and then adapt your sales process and the supporting training and coaching to accommodate those changes. But you've got to be careful not to make those changes too often, because, it takes time to embed a process. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, no, it does. It does. So let's pretend you have a crystal ball,
Yeah.
Louis, and we're looking into the future. And hopefully it's a nice, bright, positive future, and the answer's good here. But what's your perspective on? But there's no getting away from 2022 and 23 has been a tough time for us all, right? Anybody linked to SaaS and people in SaaS sales in general, right? How do you see the last part of 24 and 25 play out?
So I think it's going to be a game of two halves, actually. I think there's still quite a bit of consolidation that we're going to see over the next couple of years,
Yeah.
and particularly in the long tail of startups. Because as we all know, there've been inflated TAMs, and until recently we've had cheap and relatively available capital, that's no longer the case.
Mm.
I think that if you're, below around about 50 million ARR, you could end up struggling because, the unit economics just don't necessarily work out. And the more people there are in a particular market space, the more noise there is from every company that's out there. And all you're doing is turning buyers off.
Mm-hmm.
And I think excuse me, I think the reality is there's only so much pie to go around. And with most companies that are locked in sort of hand-to-hand combat out there that have totally undifferentiated offerings, getting cut through becomes really hard. So it's the companies that have worked out all the stuff we've just talked about over the last hour,
Yeah.
and really worked out their unit economics that are going to win out.
Mm-hmm. No, cool. So anybody that's moving into first, second, or even third line leadership, and new into the roles, is there any little anecdotal kind of bits of guidance and advice that you can share?
Yeah, just don't do it. No.
Yeah. Run, stop. Yeah.
Right, stop. Leave now. Jump out the building.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it can be really fulfilling and rewarding. But what I would say is that you have to realise that it's no longer about you. As soon as you move into a leadership position, it's about how are you going to serve your team. It's now your job to remove barriers and effectively help each and every team member grow to realise their full potential. And I think that is the key learning when you step up into, a leadership role for the first time. The other thing I'd say is it's important to enjoy it and have fun. I mean, God knows as a leader, you're going to work hard enough every day. But if you're not enjoying it, or the people that you're working with, then it's probably not for you.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, look, I think we covered a lot of ground there. I think some fantastic answers. Thank you, Louis. Really, really, really great stuff. So look, we just finished off all these kind of episodes with a little bit of fun and games, right? Quick fire questions. Yeah,
Oh,
we've got 10, I think. Just to get to know you a little bit better. So not too much thought, please. First answers that comes into your head. So first off, drum roll. Favorite piece of tech or app you are using today?
ChatGPT.
Cool. iOS or Android?
iOS.
Night at the disco or night at the restaurant?
Restaurant.
Favorite food?
Can't go beyond steak, though I do like Thai food.
Okay. Favorite movie?
Oh, The Martian.
If you were to describe yourself in 2 words, what would it be and why?
I'm not allowed to swear on this, am I?
You can do what you like.
Fucking awesome. No, I don't know. Somebody who not 2 words, but somebody who likes to have fun.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Doesn't have to even be in your career, but what's your kind of proudest moment to date?
Proudest moments to date. Actually, probably it's probably going to be something to do with sailing or skiing, because those are my 2 main passions.
2 main passions, yeah.
Yeah. So something to do
Okay,
with that.
cool. Favorite place that you visited on holiday, or just visited in your life?
Oh God, that's really difficult. I love Turkey. I lived out there for nearly 2 years. I love Corsica. I love Portugal. There's I love the Alps. There's too many great places. Not enough. I'd say not enough time. You want to travel more.
Yeah, fair enough. And I get all sorts of weird and wonderful answers to the final question for this one. If you have a guilty pleasure, what is it and why?
Oh, chocolate.
Okay, cool. Okay. Not the whiskey collection this week then. We had, no, no, it's cool.
No,
All
no,
right. Well, look,
I leave the wine for another night. Though
uh,
I tell you what, I am partial to a nice glass of wine.
okay, perfect. Hey, look, great sport. Thanks very much, Louis. Look, really thoroughly enjoyed that. If anybody, that's listening in wants to kind of get in touch and, pick your brains on anything we spoke about today, what's the best way to do that?
Via LinkedIn, always. It's the only social media platform I use these days, but that
Yeah.
is the way to get hold of me.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks again for sharing all of that, and love to have you on. Love having you on today. Thanks so much. Yeah.
No, thank you for having me on, Simon. I've really enjoyed doing it, and thanks to everybody watching.
Thanks very much. Thanks.